Miss Eleanor White was my first landlord. I was probably like 20, like 13 years ago. And I would pay my rent every month, and she was really old, and she had this thing where she would talk to me for hours about her fingers, because like the ligaments were coming undone, and she was so old, she'd be like, I'm trying to bend my fingers, but they wouldn't bend. And I always wanted to write a story about her, and this was a catalyst for that. And sometimes I Google her looking for her obituary. I haven't found it yet, so she might still be alive. So this is called Miss White. All right. When Johnny opened his back door, the humidity took his breath away. He bent over and coughed into the shrubs. He looked closely at the phlegm. It was bright yellow. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, then lit a cigarette. His landlady was sitting in the rose garden behind his apartment. You're killing yourself with those things. She pointed her hand trowel in his direction. Morning, Miss White. Johnny watched as she struggled to pull a weed, her wrinkled skin like melting wax. All these weeds are destroying my roses. With her dirty hand, she wiped sweat from her face, spreading soil on her cheeks. Johnny went back into his apartment and filled a glass with ice water. You have to drink a lot of water if you're going to be out in this heat. He gave her the glass. She took a small sip, then set it in the dirt. You going to the hardware store today? She asked. Might have to. Johnny sat on the stoop and lit another cigarette. Hanging around the parking lot of the hardware store with all those Mexicans, it's no way to earn a living. You know most of them are illegals. She paused to catch her breath. The men who pick them up, they're criminals too, taking jobs away from hardworking Americans. She pulled until her face went red. The weed wouldn't budge. Johnny stubbed his cigarette out and walked into the garden. Watch my roses. I won't hurt your flowers, Miss White. He picked up the glass and put it in her hand. She drank fast, water dripping out the corners of her mouth. I've got some calls to make. Johnny stepped out of the garden. I'll be back soon with more water. Don't you go fussing over me. Again, she aimed her hand trowel at Johnny. When Carlos heard Johnny's voice, he switched from Spanish to English. What's happening, Johnny? Nothing's happening. That's why I'm calling. Johnny walked over to the air conditioner, held his hand in front of the vent. There's not a whole lot going on my end either. What about your cousin? Does he have any work? He went to the fuse box and flipped the circuit breaker. The AC came to life. I'm desperate. I haven't paid my rent in 2 months. If there was a job, you'd be the first to know, Carlos said. Johnny held the phone away from his mouth and coughed. Jesus, Johnny, you sound like shit. You should see a doctor. Johnny hung up and went into the kitchen. He moved the dirty dishes out of the sink and coughed up phlegm. Also, there was blood. He rinsed the sink, then went to the bathroom and turned the shower on. No matter how long he let the water run, it still came out like ice. He counted down from 10, then jumped in. He moved fast, running the soap over his body and through his hair. In his medicine cabinet, he had half a dozen inhalers. He put one in his mouth and gave it 3 pumps. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and saw stars. With a damp towel wrapped around his waist, he fell into bed. He woke to the sound of car horns. He went to the window and cracked the blinds. The road outside his apartment was 4 lanes, 2 going in each direction. Miss White was in the center of the southbound lane, walking towards traffic. Some cars stopped, others simply swerved. By the time Johnny got dressed, the cops had arrived. They had Miss White in the back of their squad car. It's okay, officers. Johnny came running out, a glass of water in his hand. She's fine. He took Miss White's hand and cupped them around the glass. Just a little dehydrated, he brought the glass to her lips. This is getting to be a real problem, the heavier of the 2 cops said. "How many times have we been out here this month?" he asked his partner. "Sometimes she just forgets to drink water," Johnny said. Miss White let go of the glass. It shattered on the pavement. She pulled her shirt up over her head. Her sagging breasts were held up with a flesh-colored bra. "Miss White, no!" Johnny pulled her shirt back down. "It's so hot," she kicked off her shoes. "You've got to keep your shoes on. Look at all this glass." "We're going to have to call her son," the cop said. Then, to Miss White, "Do you know your son's telephone number?" "Please, Johnny, don't let them call my boy." She jumped up and kicked the broken glass. Johnny put his hands on her frail shoulders and pressed her back into the car. "You're going to hurt yourself," he said. "He wants to send me away. Please, Johnny, don't let them call my son. He'll send me away," she cried. "Calm down, Miss White. No one's sending you anywhere." Johnny grabbed her from under the arms, pulled her to her feet, and guided her through the glass. "This is your last warning," the cop said. "She's going to end up hurting herself." "Thank you, officers." Johnny stepped into his apartment and shut the door. He listened as the cops drove away. Miss White sat on the couch and put her head in her hands. Johnny sat next to her and rubbed her back. "Everything's going to be fine. They're going to put me in a home." Through her tears, Johnny could barely make out what she was saying. He removed her shoes and socks. He set her legs on the couch. He put one throw pillow under her feet and another under her head. "I've got so much work to do, Johnny." She tried to get up, but Johnny wouldn't let her. "You've done enough work for today." He pressed the back of his hand to her forehead. He went into the kitchen and soaked a washcloth in cold water. He wrung it out and placed it over Miss White's forehead. "That's so cold," she closed her eyes. He sat in the easy chair and waited for her to fall asleep. Then he removed the washcloth and went outside. Sitting on the stoop, he smoked a cigarette. Miss White was right. Her son would put her in a home. Then he would take over the apartment complex. That's when Johnny would get his eviction notice. He stubbed his cigarette out and began coughing. He felt his airway locking up. He told himself to be calm. If he panicked, it would only make the attack worse. Slowly, he got up and walked into the apartment. The first inhaler he tried had no medicine left. He threw it against the wall and tried another. After just one pump, he was able to breathe again. He washed his face in cold water and went out to the garden. He got down on his knees and took hold of the weed Miss White had been working on. He pulled as hard as he could. It was no use. The roots were set too deep.